Hi friends, this is Akib. Welcome back to my channel Developers Point. In this video, we will be getting to know the API project files. चलिए शुरू करते हैं. Let's begin. And please don't skip the video. If you are going to skip this video, like you are not going to understand anything, or like you are not going to get any of the content which I am going to explain in this video. So what we are going to do in this particular video, we are going to run our application and make sure it's working fine. And then we take a look at a project files to see what we get inside here and see what we will be using throughout this video as well, not this video as well, but throughout this course. So what we could do first of all is we'll open up the terminal using the keyboard shortcut, which is in my case Ctrl'. It may be different to yours, so please double check. And what we want to do is change directory into our API folder, as this contains our startup project or our only project. So we want to cd inside that, and then what we can do is use the .NET command line interface to run our application. So we'll just type in that .NET command like .NET run and hit enter, and this is going to build and run our application, and it may take few seconds the first time you do this. But what this tells us is that our application is now listening on page to localhost 5001 and on localhost 5000. So we have got an HTTP address and we have got an address as well. Now for this address we need to make sure that our browser trusts the certificate that is provided with the .NET SDK. And what we can do to achieve that is, if we just stop my application and clear the console, is we can use .NET command and we can just say .NET space dev dash certs space https dash dash trust and press enter, and it needs evaluated permission as well. So if this command doesn't work and run Windows, then you'll need to run this as an administrator so that your certificate can be trusted. If you are a Mac user, then it's going to ask you for your password to evaluate your permission here, and it tells me that a valid HTTP certificate is already present. I have already done this on my machine, but you may well need to do this on your machine in order to do it, to trust the certificate from .NET. So please go ahead and run this command so that your certificate is trusted, and we can press Ctrl and C to shut down our application. And it also tells us we are running in development mode. So what we'll do is we'll just go across the browser and we'll take a look at our application. So if we browse to this and we type in https localhost 5000, and we'll use the https address for most things. In this case what we'll find is we get the localhost page cannot be found. It tells us that it's listening on this address. But what this is an API project, and inside a API project we have API controllers, and these provide the routing endpoints from where we can find our application. Now if we take a look inside the weather forecast controller, there is a freebie controller we get when we create a new web API. It tells us that we have got a route for this called controller in square brackets, and where we can see this controller in square brackets here, this is a placeholder and it gets replaced every time with the first part of the controller name. So in this case controller gets replaced with weather forecast. So what we can do with that bit of information is we can head back to our browser and we can say / and we want to go to weather forecast controller, and if we press return, then you are going to see something like this. Now this is a list of weather forecast just to show that our application is working. And if we go back and take a look and a bit more detail about this controller, we can see that we have different summaries, a string array of different summaries. It could be freezing, drizzling, chilling, and we also have property for iLogger. Okay, we'll come back to that, and then we have some other information is in here as well. None of this is important for what we are doing right now. What we actually want to see is the controller endpoint, and this is the endpoint called http get. So when we made that request from my browser, we are making an http get request to our API, and then what this does is it returns the results of this code to an array. Now the code in here is not important at the moment. We will be doing is creating our own controller with our own endpoint and learning about the logic inside there as we go along. But what this is efficiently doing is just returning an array, a list of let's call them weather forecast, and that's fine. We know that our controller endpoint with the HTTP gets to a controller routes. The weather forecast is being displayed in our browser. Great. and we will be looking at controller in more detail because we are making an API, and these are going to form the basics of our entire application. So don't worry about my lack of detail at this stage, but we also want to do is understand how our application starts. How does it work in the first place? Well, every .NET application has a program CS class, and within this particular class there is a main method. So when the .NET run command executes, it's looking for this method and then it's going to run any of the code inside here. Now the code inside here calls another method inside this class called create host builders. And if we take our mouse and we hover over the actual method itself, the host.createDefaults builder, then this tells us what this method is actually doing, and this initializes a new instance of host builders class with some pre-configured defaults. It's going to set the content root path where to get the files that are part of our project. It's going to load our configuration now. There are several places that our application can get configuration information from. One of them is our environment variables. We can also add variables to the command line arguments when we run our application, and there is a couple of files that we have inside our application called appsettings.json and appsettings.environment. Name in our case that is like development.json as well, and it also takes the configuration from there as well, and that it also setups logging and it returns the initialized host builders from this, and inside this method as well it also tells us what else to use when starting our application and points to this use startup class now. Now this startup class is contained here, and what we have inside here is our configuration method which is being injected into our startup class. So our configuration, and when we are talking about configuration, let's just take a look at one of our configuration files, the app settings.development.json. Now at the moment the logging level for development, in my opinion, it's set too high. It's set towards it, and this does not give us the most amount of the information which we want when we are developing the application. So what we'll do is we'll swap the logging level for Microsoft to information, and if we go and take a look and I stop with the application, I just clear the console, I'll restart the app by using .NET run, then we'll get more information when something is happening. And if I go and browse and refresh my endpoint once again and go take a look at my console, we can now see that we get a lot more information inside here about what's going on. When we hit the particular endpoint, we can see that we made a get action from a weather forecast controller, for instance. So we'll leave that logging level as it is because that's going to supply us with useful information if something goes wrong. So let's head back to our startup class once again. Then we have got two methods inside here. We have got to configure service method and we have got configure method, and inside our services there is often referred to our dependency injection container. If we want to make a class or a service available to other areas or application, we can add them inside this container, and .NET Core is going to take care of the creation of these classes and the destruction of these classes when they are no longer used or they're like no longer needed. We'll come on to this in more detail as we use it. The next part is the configure method. This is used to configure the HTTP request pipeline as we made our request from our browser to our controller endpoint. Then our request go through a series of middleware on the way in and also in the way out. So first of all we check to see if we are in development mode, and if we are and our application encounters a problem, then we see use the developer exception page. We also use HTTPS redirection. So if we did come in our HTTP address, then we get redirected to HTTPS endpoint. We also set up routing. We have seen routing and actions because we were able to go from our browser, the weather forecast endpoint, and get to our forecast controller. We have got app.use authorization, which isn't doing much for us at the moment because we haven't configured any authorization, and then we have got middleware to actually use the endpoints, and we have got a method here to map the controller, and this takes a look inside our controller to see what endpoints are available. And if we once again go back to our weather forecast controller, we can see that we have a route, and the place where we have got this HTTP gets, this is our endpoint. So any GET request that goes to our web API with the weather forecast route will get sent to to this particular endpoint and we return the data to an array to another file. I just want to quickly mention inside our properties folder we have a launch settings.json. When we run our application using .NET Run, then it takes a look inside the section to see what it should use when we start our application. Now because we are creating an API, we don't really need to launch our browser. So I am going to set that to false. Launch URL, if you are not launching a browser, then it's irrelevant, so we will ignore that. Then we can see the application URLs. Where we start our application, we can see that we are running on localhost 5001 and HTTPS and also HTTP 5000. And then we have got a section for the environment variables so that when we start the application, it knows that we want to run it in development mode. And the other thing I want to mention at this moment, as well as the ability to add a file watcher to watch for any changes we make to our files. So at the moment we are just using .NET Run, but what we can do is use .NET Watch Run. And there's a lot of file watcher and keep an eye out for any file changes that take place in our application. So for example, if we just go back to the weather forecast controller and take a look at the different options we have, if you are living in the UK, then there is a couple of temperatures here that are completely irrelevant, such as sweating, and so I am just going to remove those just to as an example of real changes, and you can see that the application then rebuilds itself and then restart the application. And if you go back to your browser and just refresh the page, then you will find that there is no longer a sweating or scorching option inside here. So application rebuilds and restart, and we'll just use .NET Watch Run. As we build our application, the combination of autosave the file, which means that when we do make changes, we just have to wait for a few seconds and then go and test that change that has been taken effect or not. And this concludes the very brief run through of our files we have inside our project folder. We'll be coming back soon, all the time back. So please like, comment, share and subscribe to my channel Developers Point. Thank you.